was a damp, chilly night after a late concert when I boarded the train at 34th Street. I was tired, but looking forward to getting home. The subway car was nearly empty except for a few shadowy figures slumped over benches. I chose a seat in the far corner, hoping to catch a few moments of quiet before my stop. As the train rattled along, I couldn't help but notice a man near the door, his eyes fixed on me in the dim light. I shrugged it off as nothing more than a curious glance until the lights flickered and I heard a low, almost inaudible whisper behind me. I turned around slowly and mumbled, "Hello?" but received only silence. A few stops later, the atmosphere grew oppressive. My heart began to race when a hand clamped down on my arm. I jerked around and saw the same man, half hidden in shadow, his face unreadable. "Got a minute?" he hissed, his voice barely audible over the clatter of the train. Before I could protest, his grip tightened. Panic surged through me as I struggled, shouting, "Let go of me!" In the chaos, I felt a sharp sting. Something slipped into my pocket. I realized with horror that my wallet was gone. "My wallet!" I cried out, but in the confusion, the man melted into the crowd as the train screeched into the next station. I bolted off the train and onto the deserted platform. The chill of the night seemed to grow heavier as I scanned the area. In the faint light, I glimpsed a dark figure disappearing behind a pillar. My hands trembling, I dialed 911. The operator's calm voice tried to steady my racing heart. "Stay where you are. Help is coming." I sank onto a cold bench, replaying every moment in my mind. The man's eyes, his sudden aggression, and that eerie silence. None of it felt real. When the police arrived, the platform was already filling with commuters. I gave them every detail, emphasizing how the shadows seemed to shift and merge into something more sinister. One detective leaned in and said, "Subway rides can be unpredictable, but we'll check the footage." Even as he spoke, I couldn't shake the lingering feeling of being watched. That night, the memory of that spectral figure and the desperate struggle haunted me. Now, whenever I ride the subway, I glance over my shoulder. Sometimes, on quiet, rainy nights, I swear the shadows are waiting for another chance to strike. After a long night of work at a downtown bar, I decided to head home on foot instead of catching a cab. The neon lights of the club still flickered behind me as I stepped out into a near-empty side street. The air was cool, and I walked briskly, trying to shake off the lingering beats and chatter. As I neared a quiet intersection, I noticed 4 men in dark jackets huddled on a bench. Their faces were obscured by hoods and shadows, and something about their stillness made my skin crawl. I quickened my pace, hoping to pass by unnoticed. But as I moved further, I heard one of them murmur, "Hey, wait up." I turned to see them rising slowly, their footsteps echoing on the pavement. "Leave me alone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The men advanced in unison. One of them stepped forward and sneered. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" His tone was mocking yet laced with menace. I felt my heart pound as I began to back away, glancing desperately for a safe haven. I just need to get home," I stuttered. But before I could take another step, they closed in. One reached out and brushed against my arm. I flinched, and in that split second, felt the tug of a hand at my wallet. "Hey!" I shouted, wrenching my arm away, but they were too quick. The confrontation escalated. Shouts, scuffling, and the heavy sound of boots against concrete. I managed to break free in a burst of adrenaline, sprinting toward a nearby convenience store. The attackers' angry voices echoed behind me as I ducked into the relative safety of the brightly lit storefront. Inside, trembling and out of breath, I called the police. The clerk tried to reassure me, but I could only repeat the events over and over. They took my wallet. They were all wearing dark jackets, I said repeatedly, my voice shaking. By the time the police arrived, the street was empty again. Security footage later confirmed that a group of local troublemakers had been targeting late-night pedestrians. Though my wallet was gone, the real cost was the lingering dread that followed me that night. Even now, when I walk home after my shift, I scan every dark corner, haunted by the memory of those men and their cold, unfeeling stares. Online dating had always been a gamble, but when I matched with someone charming named Ethan on a popular app, I felt a spark of hope. His profile was filled with smiling photos and thoughtful messages. After a few days of chatting, we agreed to meet at a cozy, out-of-the-way coffee shop in the city. I arrived early, nervous yet excited. When Ethan finally walked in, his smile was warm and inviting. "Hi, it's great to finally meet you," he said, shaking my hand firmly. The conversation flowed naturally over coffee, and I began to relax. But as the date progressed, I noticed a subtle shift. Ethan's questions grew more probing. Details about my daily routine, my apartment, even my favorite spots in the neighborhood. "Is everything okay?" I asked hesitantly when his inquiries became too personal. He laughed lightly. "Of course, I just like getting to know you better." I tried to brush it off, but an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. After finishing our coffee, Ethan suggested a walk in a nearby park. The moon hung low and the park was nearly deserted. As we strolled along a winding path, his tone turned almost clinical. "Tell me, do you live alone?" he asked, his eyes locked on mine. I hesitated, feeling my pulse quicken. "Yes, why?" I replied, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he fell into a heavy silence before his voice turned low and serious. "I just need to know. If anything were to happen, I want to be sure you're safe." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I began to wonder if this was just concern or something more ominous. Suddenly, he grabbed my arm tightly. "Stay with me," he murmured, and I felt a cold dread wash over me. In that moment, I realized that the charming stranger from the coffee shop had become something entirely different. A man whose intentions were not as innocent as they once seemed. My heart pounded as I wrenched free, shouting, "Let go!" I broke into a run, my footsteps echoing through the quiet park. I didn't stop until I reached a busy street lit by neon signs and the hum of traffic. Gasping for breath, I looked back and saw Ethan standing silently in the shadows, his face expressionless. That night, I called a friend and stayed on the line until I felt safe enough to head home. Though I never saw Ethan again, his image still haunts me. A stark reminder that sometimes the person behind a charming profile may hide a much darker side. Working in a rundown apartment building in Brooklyn, I rarely expected trouble in my own home. One rainy night, after a long shift at the diner, I stepped into the building's aging elevator. The interior was dimly lit, and the old music crackled softly in the background. I pressed the button for my floor and leaned against the wall, lost in thought. Suddenly, the elevator shuddered to a stop between floors. The lights flickered, plunging the small space into an eerie half-darkness. My heart began to race. A few moments later, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching the elevator doors. The metal slid open with a creak to reveal two men standing in the narrow hallway. Their eyes were hidden beneath dark caps, and their expressions were unreadable. "Need some help?" one of them asked in a low, almost friendly tone. His smile did nothing to ease my rising fear. Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The men exchanged a glance before one stepped inside. The elevator doors closed behind him, trapping us in that confined space. I could feel his presence close by. The air grew cold and heavy. "Just relax," he said, leaning in closer. I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand, a small, glistening knife. Panic seized me, and I pressed the emergency button. The button's red light pulsed as I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. For what felt like an eternity, the elevator remained motionless. The man's words were soft yet sinister. "You don't want to make this difficult." My pulse thundered as I realized I was at the mercy of this stranger in a place that should have been safe. Finally, with a jolt, the elevator lurched back into motion. The doors opened on my floor, and without a word, the man stepped out into the dark corridor. I stumbled out, shaking uncontrollably, and rushed into the building lobby. Later, when I recounted the incident to the police, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't managed to alert someone. Even now, I avoid that elevator, haunted by the memory of those cold, calculating eyes and the feel of danger pressing in from every side. I'd always been a quiet student at one of New York's oldest prep schools, where traditions ran deep and rumors even deeper. At first, I thought the whispers about a mysterious classmate were just idle gossip. That all changed when a boy named Evan started following me everywhere. He wasn't new. No one recalled his name from earlier classes, but his presence was impossible to ignore. It began one crisp autumn morning. I was walking down a long, dim corridor when I noticed Evan at the far end, his eyes fixed on me with a strange intensity. "Good morning," I said politely, but he didn't reply. In class, I could sense him watching from a shadowed corner, his gaze never leaving mine. The discomfort grew until it was impossible to ignore. One afternoon after school, as I walked to the library, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my ears. "Stop following me," I whispered, more to myself than to him, but no matter where I turned, there he was, always in the periphery, always watching. That night I found a note slipped under my door. It read, "I know what you fear." I felt a chill run down my spine as I read it over and over. The next day, during a break between classes, I confronted him. "Evan, why are you always around me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He only smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "I just want to be your friend." "Friend?" His tone was too hollow, too rehearsed. Over the following weeks, his behavior escalated. I would catch him lurking near the stairwell, his presence unmistakably unsettling. One day I saw him peering through the windows of the empty dorm hallway at night. "Please leave me alone," I texted a friend, but the messages brought no comfort. After one particularly frightening incident, when I nearly tripped over his outstretched hand in the corridor, I reported everything to the school authorities. They assured me they'd keep an eye on him, but deep down, I knew something was off. Even now, when I walk those ancient halls, I feel his presence lingering like a shadow. I wonder if Evan is a troubled soul or something more sinister. A reminder that sometimes the person who seems harmless on the surface may hide a secret that turns your life into a living nightmare.